Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam Hilchot Mamrim, Perek Dal Halacha Aleph, where he talks about the Halacha of Zaken Mamre. Zaken Mamre is a sage who argues defiantly against the rulings of the Sanhedrin, which is a capital crime if all the conditions are met. So the Rambam mentions one of these conditions, Zaken, Shechalak al Bezdin, B'dabish Chayavim al Zdei Kares, a sage who argues with the courts in a matter for which intentional violation would carry the penalty of kares, and for unintentional, unwitting violation of the law, you would have to bring a chatas, a sin offering. So in these cases, he is subject to the penalty of Zaken Mamre. When he says, Bein shehayu hein eisen behu matir, whether they said it's forbidden, and he says, no, it's permissible. Or conversely, if they were the ones who said that this certain particular act is permissible, and he said it's forbidden, he's subject to the death penalty. Then later on, the Rambam says, same thing would apply, the same penalty would apply if he disagrees with them about a rabbinical commandment. They issue a decree concerning a matter for which the biblical violation would be kares and chatas. For example, chametz biblically is forbidden to be consumed Erev Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, from noon onward. But Chachamim extended that and made it even earlier. They said that in the 6th hour of the day, it's also forbidden to eat chametz, and he said it was permissible. So prohibition is a rabbinical one, but it's about chametz, which, when it's the right time, prescribed time for the prohibition, it is biblically forbidden, and it carries the penalty of kares. So in that case, he's ruling about a rabbinical matter, but a rabbinical matter that's connected to a biblical commandment. And he is subject to the death penalty, and is anything similar to that. In other words, any time the Zaken Mamre, the rebellious sage, rules against the Sanhedrin, when it comes to a matter that's biblically forbidden with the penalty of kares, or rabbinically forbidden as an extension of the prohibition that is biblically mandated, in either case, he is considered to be a Zaken Mamre, and it's subject to the death penalty. The Ramban, in his criticisms of the Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam, takes issue with the Rambam and disagrees, and he says, no, as long as it's only a rabbinical prohibition, even though it's connected to a biblical prohibition, there is no law of Zaken Mamre. Rav Chaim Brisker, cited by Rav Chaim Brisker in his Divrei Seifrim, explains the dispute of the Rambam and the Ramban, that they are arguing about the status of a rabbinical commandment. The reason why we are obligated to follow the rabbinical laws is because it says in the Torah, "Leisosar," you shouldn't deviate from whatever they tell you, right or left. The question is, when the Chachamim issue a law that says it's forbidden to do something which the Torah didn't forbid, but it's an extension of what the Torah prohibited, is it considered to be in the same category as what the Torah prohibited? For example, we're dealing with chametz. Chametz is biblically forbidden, obviously, and it's intrinsic to the chametz, that is, the prohibition is a chametz prohibition. When the rabbis extended the prohibition to extend not only to the afternoon of the Erev Pesach, but even before that, you're not allowed to eat it even the hour before, the 2 hours before, depending on the different opinions, what the status of the prohibition is, it becomes a isra of chametz. In other words, the chefza, the object, is an object of chametz. The Torah didn't consider it chametz, but the Chachamim extended the status, the title of chametz, to that period of time. Or do we say, no, chametz is not chametz. This is not chametz. This is a rabbinical extension, so why can't we eat it? Because the Torah says we are not allowed to deviate from what the sages tell us. In other words, when you violate it, you're violating something that has nothing to do with the biblical prohibition. It's because of the biblical prohibition, the safeguard, but it is not an extension of a biblical prohibition, and therefore you're not considered to have eaten chametz. So that is the understanding of this dispute. The Rambam, who holds that the Zaken Mamre is liable for the death penalty when he argues about the prohibition, the rabbinical prohibition of chametz, he holds that it is chametz. The Chachamim extended it to that it's considered to be a chelik of the prohibition of chametz. The Torah says chametz is such a prohibition that applies to a certain time. Chachamim extended it to another time, but it is considered chametz. If it's considered chametz, then he's called a Zaken Mamre. The Ramban, on the other hand, says no. The Ramban goes l'shitase that the prohibition of the rabbinical prohibition is not chametz. The prohibition has nothing to do with chametz. It's related to chametz, but it's a prohibition of you're not allowed to violate what Chachamim tell us. And this dispute has another nafkamina. Rav Chaim Brisker says, we know that there are three prohibitions for which a person has to give his life: avodah zara, gili arayis, and shfichas damim. And a person is confronted with a situation they have to either violate or give up their life. They're obligated to surrender their life. What about if it is a rabbinical extension of the prohibition of avodah zara, for example, that the rabbis said it's avodah zara, but biblically it's not avodah zara? If you follow the shita of the Rambam, that chametz midrabanan is considered chametz, the same thing would be true over here, that an extension of avodah zara is avodah zara, and for which you have to give your life. On the other hand, according to the Ramban, that it's not considered chametz, it's only considered a violation of the rabbinical law, not to deviate from what they tell us. The same thing would be true about the avodah zara. It's not avodah zara, it's a rabbinical prohibition, but it's not avodah zara, for which you don't have to give your life. It would seem, there's a famous Gemara in Seita, and other places brought down, that a person should be prepared to thrown into a fiery furnace rather than embarrass someone in public. It's considered shvichas damim, it's considered murder. So the question is that considered a biblical prohibition, or is it's based on a story of Tamar and Yehuda, that she was willing to be burnt rather than embarrassing him? But that doesn't have a status of a biblical prohibition because it was something that happened before the Torah was given. So does that mean literally one is obligated, if you follow the Rambam, that at least there's a rabbinical prohibition involved in embarrassing someone, an extension of leitirtzach, then you'd have to give your life. According to the Ramban, it has perhaps a rabbinical prohibition because we see from the Torah that she was prepared to die, and therefore it has no status of shvichas damim, and therefore you wouldn't have to give your life. It's not to be taken as a chiyuv, as an outright obligation.